Welcome to Agency Office Hours for April 2021. Our theme this month is agency growth, including how to grow faster, when to grow slower, and how to make it all fit together. Hi, I'm agency consultant Karl Sakas. In our monthly Q&A, we answer questions about running your agency more profitably as you grow your agency toward your long-term goals. As a preview, the questions we're going to be answering today, well, here's the lineup. Stacy in Pennsylvania has a question about scaling your agency without hiring a salesperson. Patrick in Florida has a question about when to slow down sales when things are going a bit too fast. Brandy in Kansas has a question about when to hire certain key roles. Forrest in New York has a question about what to do when your agency has become too top-heavy. And time permitting, Christina in Chicago has a question about how to handle disorganized clients who are disorganized but also micromanagers. Definitely a challenge. As usual, we're recording office hours today. We'll share this afterwards on YouTube and beyond. So if you have to ask a question, don't share anything you don't want to become public, since we are out there. And if you're listening live, please introduce yourself. Where are you joining from today? Thanks for being here. Our first question today is from Stacy. She has a question about scaling your agency without hiring a salesperson. She was planning to join live, but apparently had a client situation just come up. So she is not here live. I'm going to answer the question in absentia. All right. Well, here's the question. Stacy asked, how can we scale our agency without having to hire a salesperson? In general, if you want to grow quickly, you probably will hire a salesperson, or if you're the owner, you're going to spend a fair amount of your time on sales. That does tend to go along when you're seeking to grow rapidly. But you can scale your agency in terms of business development by improving your own marketing. I know we talk about the shoemaker's kids problem, the cobbler's kids have no shoes, where agencies often, neglect their own marketing. Neglect your own marketing at your peril. Sales, whether you're doing it yourself or you have a salesperson helping, is a lot easier when your marketing is stronger. If you're joining live, Kat is sharing some links in chat about how to think about your self-marketing priorities, how to confirm some benchmarking on whether you're spending enough on your own marketing, and also looking for ways to delegate in your sales process to help close those deals faster without wasting time on tire kickers, looky-loos, and other not very serious sales prospects. So some things to keep in mind. Any follow-up questions about how to scale without necessarily hiring a salesperson? All right. Well, next up is Patrick. We have a question from Patrick about when to slow down sales. Patrick, if you want to, see you've just unmuted yourself, thank you. And let me go ahead and bring you on screen as well. Here we go. All right. Well, Patrick, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Carl. I'm a big fan, just so you know. I actually have a question for you. All the content that you have, do you write it yourself? This is some really good content.
Thank you. Thank you. So historically, I've written everything myself with team members helping on editing and things like that. More recently, I've brought in a copywriter to help where I'll create the article brief and then she'll expand it out. Now, I will say sometimes the brief is almost as long as the article itself. So I don't know necessarily how much time that saves, but delegation. And I have a backlog of article ideas that at this point, whenever I think of a new article idea, I'll add it as a draft in WordPress, and there are over 700 drafts of future articles. Yeah. So
you have some real excellent content that for me, your website is like the new social media. I'd go there to read one article, and then after like half an hour to an hour just reading stuff, and all of it always makes.
This is like the Netflix approach. Once you start, you can't stop. So awesome. Yeah. Well, Patrick, thank you, and thank you for joining today. So I know you had emailed your question or submitted ahead of time. What I'll do is I'll summarize your question and then let's dig in on solving it.
Okay.
So, Patrick, you asked, when should we slow down our sales if we've been growing quickly? If you could elaborate on that, and then let's dig into answering.
Yeah. So essentially, it's where, because we've been doing such a good job for our clients, my company is Balambico. We are obviously a digital marketing agency. We have a location in Florida and Atlanta. And we got new business because of COVID. Companies needed to increase um, their online presence and their sales strategy. And we got to the point where one of our clients, in the middle of a pandemic, been getting like over 100 new customers a day. And
Wow.
he's getting so much business that he doesn't know what to do. It's like, all right,
A nice problem to have, but still a problem.
correct, and that's for him to have, right? So in our case, well, because we've had that success with him, we have a lot of new interest. So we end up having the
Got
same
it.
problem that he has, quote unquote. Like, so how do we manage that? How do you manage increase of business, right? We have some ideas around it.
Right.
Like, for example, start to niche and charge more for the services, so you can
Yes.
narrow down your money goals, right? But I just wanted to get from you, like, what are some additional things that, obviously you don't want to slow sales, right? But how do you keep
Right.
getting
Don't
sales?
stop sales altogether. That never goes well long term. Whenever clients are like, I'm thinking of stopping sales for, a few months or a bit, you're going to regret it in 6 months. So good to be thinking about not stopping altogether. And you're on
Right.
the right track about looking at, whether to niche and also raising prices. Consider if your proposal win rate, if you are winning more than, say, 80% of the proposals you're submitting, that probably means you can charge more, right? You can charge
Mhm.
more and close more like 50 to 70%, you'll probably come out ahead. But let's take a look at that question around, in general, how to approach whether to slow down and how to go about it. I would start by asking yourself, what is your preferred agency growth style? You may have seen my article about the lifestyle versus equity continuum. If you lean more toward lifestyle, and it's a continuum, you're going to be somewhere in the middle, lean one or the other. If you lean toward lifestyle, slowing down growth may make sense. Say if you're growing 20% a year, that's totally fine. If you lean more toward the equity side, where the goal is to grow to sell the agency, you may be seeking to grow more, 30, 50, 100%. You're probably not going to double every year forever, but, where, Patrick, for you, where do you fall on the lifestyle versus equity continuum as an agency leader?
Right. So I think it's a happy medium. So, I've been doing some business coaching as well. And one of the key things that come up is like, what's your exit strategy? Right.
Yes.
So we see our company like really going to that point of
Mhm.
of go to the point of being able to sell. And and so my company is Balambico. So it's really my nickname incorporated. So it's really all about me being a little bit
Got
selfish,
it.
right? And what my lifestyle looks like is that this company grows to the point that, it's a multi-million dollar company with a bunch of products and services, right?
Mhm.
Additionally, my exit strategy looks like I come in just, to a couple hours a day. And then the rest of my time is spent me doing professional speaking, triathlons, right? And really, so that's my vision.
Got it.
So,
Got it.
yeah.
So one of the things to look at would be what are the levers to help make that happen? So if it's a case, maybe if you're choosing to slow down growth a bit so that you can get someone in the team to handle work you're currently doing, so that you can then make yourself more optional, that probably makes sense, right? You're being intentional, you're being strategic about it. So maybe it's someone doing strategy consulting with clients, maybe it's someone doing sales, you're probably not, you mentioned if you're going to be doing speaking and other thought leadership, you're probably not going to make yourself optional there. Maybe it's about being the day-to-day contact for clients. And Kat will be sharing my article on the 6 agency roles coming up in a bit. You could take a look at the 6 roles and decide which ones do you want to get off your plate. In that case, if you're slowing down a bit to help get those people in or to help up level your current team, that could be a a good way to focus. Beyond that, two other things to consider. One, doing a debrief or a post-mortem on delivery. Every time you deliver a project to a new client, or maybe partway through, if it's on a retainer basis, do a review. And it's really just three simple, powerful questions: what worked, what didn't, what to do differently next time. I do that with every client in my work internally with my team, in addition to getting client feedback as well. And there are always ways you can tweak things. So it may be possible that you're able to grow with the existing setup by making certain changes. That won't necessarily accelerate enormous growth, but you can potentially do more with the existing systems and situation. The other thing to consider would be looking at ways to upgrade your client onboarding process. For a lot of agencies, that's one of the big bottlenecks, where maybe marketing and sales is going smoothly, they've got team to get the delivery done, but that's starting the delivery process. The handoff from the sales process to delivery in onboarding can be where they get stuck. So those are some things to keep in mind. Obviously, you want to dig a bit deeper. Any follow-up questions from that, Patrick?
Yeah, that sounds great, and that's some of what I guess we were thinking about as well. We
Excellent.
have ours, especially for the onboarding process, where we're using separate tools, and we realize that the main system that we use is something called WHMCS, and it
Okay.
does have ways to integrate everything, right? From the
Mm,
onboarding process, like the questionnaire we send them, get them the system, like essentially you hit the nail on the head. How can we become more efficient? Because that's the
yes.
challenge, as you probably can tell, and you hit all the cues. Okay, need to hire more salespeople, need to hire more project management type people, right? I need to look at what are my $15 an hour tasks that I'm doing, which is probably just assigning tickets to clients, right? To get someone in to do that, and how do you have so I guess that's it. I guess that's the one you can answer for me. Like, when do you know when to hire the next, when do you decide when your next hire should be? And how do you get to that point? It's like a chicken and an egg, right? You need more sales to hire more people. How do you get
Exactly.
that happy medium? And
And
then when they
it's
come in, they have to learn the system. And then
well,
you have to
and
teach
it's
it to them.
smart to be thinking intentionally about that. I'll share a link coming up about an event I'm doing with SharpSpring about my second annual agency industry survey. One of the things I noticed where we asked about profit margins, in general, the larger the agency to a point, the lower their profit margins. Now, of course, the absolute profits would be higher for the larger agencies, but a lot of agencies just grow, grow, grow without thinking about profits. It's just hire people, that. I would say the key thing, Patrick, and this is true for everyone who's listening, think about where you fall on the lifestyle versus equity growth style continuum. If you lean toward lifestyle, you probably want to wait a little bit longer before you hire. If you lean toward the equity side, you're trying to build a very high growth agency, you may need to hire somewhat ahead of demand before you have the client demand based on sales momentum, so that when you close the deal or several deals, you've got the team ready to go rather than struggling. So uh,
Yeah. So
does
just
that
to add
help?
to what just to add to what you were saying. Right now I'm more towards lifestyle. Because when I see the equity part, you need to have financing to that's what's there for me. You need to have financing to be able to take the loss of that equity style process.
Yes, and that could be a whole separate office hours just on that, which I'm sure someday we will do. But Patrick, thank you so much for the question. I appreciate your
Uh,
joining, and please let me know how it all goes.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, next up is Brandy. Brandy, if you want to unmute yourself and come on video, let me go ahead and set it up here. There we go. Well, Brandy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So to paraphrase, you have a question about hiring key roles. That actually piggybacking on Patrick's question. I'll paraphrase your question and then we can dig in. Brandy, you asked, when should we consider hiring an operations manager and a director of client services? Two key roles, and I've actually had both of those titles myself at agencies. Could you elaborate a bit on the question, and then we'll dig in on answering?
Yeah, thank you. So to put a bit of context around it, we are a 20-person agency. And right now we have, let's call it 3 arms of the agency. We have a creative team, and we have a creative director who leads that team. We have a development team. We have a director of technology. And then we have like our account team and our marketing team kind of combined as one. And right now there's not a director over that arm. And so all of those staff report to me. So I have 2 directors, direct reports, and then I have some others. So in total, I have 8 direct reports right now.
Which is, if we think about the idea of span of control or span of management, that's how many people report to you directly. That's more than the ideal range, which is typically 5 to 7 direct reports. Now, this obviously didn't happen overnight, right? It was as you brought in more people and as you've been growing, this has happened. So there's a question of now what?
Right. And so I've got, yeah, I'm trying to think through like what is that role? What makes sense? I have somebody, I have somebody who leads strategy for accounts today. That person has the potential of going into like a client services or a director of strategy and ensuring and overseeing that what we're doing for every client aligns to their goals and is delivering the results.
Yes.
Feels like that's one, potential role and need. There's also this role of overseeing that we're servicing our clients well, that, we're prepared for all of our meetings, that we're following the process, that we're delighting clients. And I'm trying to decide if that is all one role or if it's 2 separate roles. And then just any feedback you have on, based on the size of my agency, if you would expect and see there being a director or managers in those roles.
So maybe first to take a look at the operations manager role, because that's a bit more closed-ended in terms of deciding there. You're definitely on track at 20 people to hire an operations manager. They would probably consolidate certain administrative things you're doing, as well as things that other people are doing. They may be, operations manager is kind of a catch-all title from having been an operations manager, director of operations. Usually it's kind of everything that needs to happen that the owner or owners don't want to do. It's kind of a catch-all sort of role, but often it includes things like overseeing recruiting, so it's a lot easier when you have someone dedicated or spending time on recruiting. They may be overseeing more ongoing HR related things in terms of compliance and filings and things like that, or maybe liaising with outside HR advisors, that kind of thing. They're often involved in traffic. So maybe they aren't personally assigning everyone out to every project or client retainer, but they're sort of looking ahead. They're like, these 2 PMs both need the same resource 2 weeks out. I'm going to have to either get a freelancer lined up or, do some horse trading about who's going to get help. And then that impacts the project managers, which then impacts the account managers. Clients are less happy if they know there's going to be a delay several weeks before the delay happens rather than, after it happens. So the operations manager role at 20 people, it's reasonable to hire someone. It is probably more of an operations manager rather than a director of operations. Although, if you choose to continue growing, you probably want someone who could serve as a director of operations, overseeing a bit more. Before we talk about the account management, project management, kind of the delivery and strategy work, and any follow-up questions, Brandy, about the operations manager advice?
What percent of utilization do you typically see this role? How billable are they?
The operations manager could be anywhere from 0% billable if they're internal only to maybe 10% if they're supporting the team on quality assurance. Like they tend to be detail oriented. They're probably a good person to be doing QA reviews. They might be maybe 20% billable if they were also doing traffic, because you can build, prorated portions of the traffic work, the kind of the resource management out to clients. But they're not going to be enormously billable. A project manager is going to be 50% billable, maybe a bit more. A subject matter expert is going to be 80% billable, plus or minus. A strategist is probably going to be 60% plus billable. An account manager, probably 50% plus. So an operations manager is in more of the support role. If we think about the 6 agency roles: account management, project management, your subject matter experts, SMEs, design, development, that kind of thing, strategist, biz dev, and support. So in general, the operations manager won't be very billable, but the work they do helps enable increasing billables and increasing profitability for everyone else.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Well, so taking a look at the director of client services question, and I think you're on the right track about a potential catch-all name for or title for that role. So it sounds like it's overseeing account management, project management, and strategy. Or is that those are the things you're thinking about?
Yes.
Okay. So I'd say director of client services is the right title. When I was a director of client services, that's what I was overseeing. And then I eventually shifted into adding more operations roles and became director of operations. But I think that's on the right track. One risk of combining that so that everyone reports to the one person, they're probably going to lean toward one of those three themselves. They might lean toward strategy, they might lean toward account management, they might lean toward project management, and there's somewhat different mindsets. That's not to say don't hire one person to oversee them, but they're going to have some blind spots. For instance, if they lean toward project management, which is more my background, PMs tend to be detail oriented, get the work done smoothly and profitably. Whatever we've said we're going to do, we're going to get it done. But that means that they have a blind spot about upsell and growth opportunities. Whereas an account manager is all about how do we keep the client happy? How do we find those growth opportunities? What are the upsells? They're listening when the client mentions that, another department at the client company is thinking of doing such and such. They're like, aha, sales opportunity. Like, let's figure out how to get an intro over to that other department. Someone who's more PM oriented is more like, we need to get done what we've said we're going to get done. And someone who's strategy oriented tends to be thinking more about, abstract possibilities rather than what you've committed to do or how the client is necessarily feeling. Now, these are some generalizations. Everyone is unique, but there are pros and cons to each. PMs get the work done, but sometimes they frustrate the clients because it's focusing just on, what's previously been agreed. Account managers, clients love them. They often aren't as detail oriented, and often because they're frequently people pleasers, account manager oriented people tend to be giving away a lot of free work because nothing makes a client like you like giving them free work. And then on the strategist side, they may be focused more on possibilities rather than thinking, say, from a PM perspective, like, how are we going to get the budget for that? Like to do that well would require, tripling their budget or something like that, and so on. So think about the person when you're hiring that role, what is the ideal mix? And if you could think of it as percentages, should they be, 50% PM, 30% account management, 20% strategy? Is it more like 50% strategy? Probably not, from what you've shared so far. But sort of how does it lean? Because then you can ask candidates. You could say, if the role, you're overseeing account management, project management, and strategy, what's your ideal mix of those over a typical week? Recognizing a typical week is going to vary. And they can give you their percentages. One that helps you compare. So if they want to do, 80% strategy and that that's like 10% of the job, I probably would not recommend hiring them. They're going to be a reluctant employee, not doing the things you need them to do. Maybe it's a situation where, they lean toward project management, but they have trouble doing the mental math to add up the percentages. That's probably not a good sign. You may ask someone, maybe they lean more toward the account management side, and they never really answer the question. They're like, well, I'd really like to account management strategy. And you're like, yeah, the percentages. What are the percentages? Kind of thing. Like, it gives you a window into how they approach work. But I would say get clear on the ideal percentage mix in terms of how they're leaning. That'll help you find the right person. And that includes finding the right past experience. Do you want someone who's come from an account management background, keep the clients happy, but you've got someone else on the team making sure the details happen? Maybe it's more about we've got to overhaul delivery. Clients are generally happy already. The account managers can keep them happy. Basically, the key thing there is that the director is going to be advising the people reporting to them. What are they going to be naturally good at? that's ideally the thing you want to focus on because their job is to up-level the team.
Right.
What's your reaction to all of that?
I think it makes a ton of sense. So again, on this role, what percent would you see them billable? Because I'm trying to decide if this role is primarily at a director level where they're overseeing others or if they're actually managing some accounts themselves, and if it's a hybrid role.
At 20, your headcount of 20, you're on the cusp of that.
Okay.
So for instance, as a director of client services, at the time, the agency had about 8 people. So I was doing account management, project management, and client strategy. Like it's a lot of stuff at once. In that case, I was generally like 60% plus billable, which is, sort of high for account management and project management, about on track for strategy, but I was also then increasingly doing operations on top of that. So, I was working like 50 to 60 hours a week. So thinking about the combo of the roles, they're probably not going to be substantially more billable than say like 50 to 60%, probably 40 to 60, depending on how much the people management comes in.
Yeah.
How many people would they be overseeing?
I would say probably around 5.
Around 5. So I would expect them to bill, yes, at least 40%. They probably could do 50, depending on how much client-related drama there is. If there's less, they might get to 60%. But part of their job is to be doing non-billable work that helps the agency, like keeping an eye on how the client relationships are going, keeping an eye to fix problems before they become problems, coordinating with the future operations manager to streamline things, and in general, getting the people reporting to them who are going to be more billable relative to, to compensation, keeping them as billable as possible.
Yeah.
So 60% would be the high end, 40% would not be unreasonable if they're spending a lot of time with the team. And maybe they start at 40% and the goal is to get to 50% within some number of months.
Okay. Last follow-up question on it. Between those two roles, ops manager and director of client services, who would you see typically doing things like developing and writing out playbooks for how we execute things within the agency?
Probably a combination of the director of client services and the operations manager, in the sense that the director of client services is going to be most familiar with how things work, but the operations manager is probably going to be more excited about creating documentation. So ideally put the two of them together. So maybe the director of client services is responsible for getting it done, like it's their job, but the operations manager might be the one building the document and tracking down the details and things like that. It'll also depend on the individual personalities too.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Well, Randy, thank you for joining. Good luck as you work through that. Coming up next, we have questions from Forrest and Christina. But first, a word from our sponsor. Today's event is sponsored by Sakas & Company, helping you grow your agency profitably this year and beyond. Speaking of this year and beyond, running an agency is never easy, and COVID, uncertainty, and isolation have made things even harder. Thinking in 2020, you knew how you were doing, but you weren't always sure how it compared to what other agencies were dealing with beyond people that you may have known personally. As the pandemic lockdowns started, I partnered with SharpSpring to ask agencies how they were doing and what they expected, what they predicted would happen in 2020 and beyond. What were the results? Well, a year later, we're still not done with COVID, unfortunately. Like, things are better across the agencies I work with, but not totally done. To see how agencies are coping, I worked again with SharpSpring to survey that same universe of agencies. If you're on my email list, you may have gotten the promos about that survey back in February and March as we were doing the survey. It was anonymous, so I don't know who specifically took it. And we received responses from 349 agency leaders worldwide. Next week, with a recording afterwards, I will share key results from that survey. how agencies are doing, and what they expect to come. I encourage you to RSVP. Kat is sharing a link to that in chat to help you make better decisions for 2021 and beyond. Next up, we have a question from Forrest. Forrest, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself. There we go. I see you're back. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, I will paraphrase the question and then we'll dig in on answering it. All right. Well, to paraphrase for us, you asked, we've become a top-heavy organization. We now have an under-delegation problem. What should we do? Forrest, welcome, and please elaborate a bit.
Sure. Thank you. And thanks for featuring this question. So yes, I'm really struggling with the resistance of the senior staff in terms of delegating. And you hear things like, I can do it faster myself. When the work that I get back from someone who's more junior, I have to correct it. We have to go through several rounds. It takes a lot more time. It's more frustrating. And so we end up with junior or, less experienced folks experiencing a kind of burnout that's from underutilization and not being challenged. And the more senior folks talk about, we don't have enough staff. I need more senior people and I can't continue to work like this. So that's kind of where we are.
Definitely a frustrating situation. And there are likely a number of different causes going on there, but we can dig into some of the most likely places to look next, so you can then follow up on that. And for everyone who's listening, whether live or to the recording, you're like, ooh, I recognize some of those phrases, and maybe you've said it yourself. This will be helpful. So Forrest, whenever things aren't getting done, if we think about the executive team stepping in to do things that the rest of the team isn't doing, one of the big things is around the idea of, if we think of a Venn diagram, desire, competence, and capacity. If something isn't getting done, people need the desire to do it. They need to want to do it. They need the competence. They need to know how to do it well. And they also need capacity. They need time in their schedule to get it done. When things aren't getting done, usually at least one of those is missing, sometimes more. If you don't have desire, you're not going to do it. If you don't have competence, you're going to do it poorly. If you don't have capacity, which is most often true for agency owners and executives, you want to do it, you can do it, you just don't have time. In this case, it sounds like, from what you're hearing from your executive team, your leadership team, their team members, the people who report to them, may not have the level of competence they need to get things done. And that's not to say that they are, incompetent people in general. It's more just that they don't necessarily have the right level of skill to get the work done at the quality level you need. Now, there's, of course, perception and there's reality. Sometimes I find, agency leaders are like, my team can't do it. And then we dig into it and it's like, well, actually, they could do it. Maybe they can do it, or they could if you did some additional training. It is always, if you think about that comment about it's faster to do it myself. Yeah, it's usually faster to do it yourself the first time. But if it's something you're doing every week, it's probably worth investing some time to train, delegate, oversee the transition so that you're not doing it every week for the rest of your life. So thinking about those factors, does something resonate there about where you'd want to dig in a bit deeper? Is it a lack of, if the more junior team isn't doing it, is it about desire, competence, capacity, something else?
I would say some combination of perceived competence. And you mentioned the lack of investing in the talent or training them. And my follow-up on that would be, who's responsible for that? Because everyone sort of tends to point their fingers at me and say, you need to do more training. And I would say, well, you guys, you got to mentor and bring them along. So.
I would agree with you. Roughly how many people are at the agency currently?
100.
Okay, yeah, it is absolutely the executives and managers' job to be doing this. If you had 10 people, it would be reasonable for you to be doing it. But at 100, no, like you've got a team, you've got the structure. And there are a few ways to do this. One is for you as the leader of the agency, part of that is setting the agenda to make clear to people on the executive team, part of their job is to develop their team. And that's going to be different, right? Like the executive team members, as they develop, say, their directors, that's going to be different, right? The directors are going to focus on developing their management skills, whereas the directors are going to be focusing on developing more of the subject matter expert type skills for people on their teams, that kind of thing. So it, it kind of cascades up and down. But ultimately, people need to understand that if they have people reporting to them, hopefully no more than 5 to 7 direct reports per person, part of their job is to develop their team. That is why, in part, thinking about our discussion a bit earlier, managers and directors and VPs and C-level people are less billable, or sometimes not even billable at all, because their job is to develop and manage and coach their team. And that could be at least 10% of their time. It might be 20% of their time. If you're in a senior role, that could be almost all of your time. That, of course, impacts billables, right? If someone is getting, 6-figure compensation and they are not billable, but they're also not adding value in other ways, that's its own problem, which could be a whole separate Q&A call. But ultimately, to that point of who's responsible, for an agency of your size, around 100 people, the leaders and managers are absolutely responsible for developing their team. And if they don't have resources internally, then their job is to go to their manager and recommend and or request additional resources. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
There's also that. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to follow up on the perceived, but you go ahead, please.
Well, that was my next question, which is, perception versus reality. If the thought is that a team member is not competent, is that true? Or is it really more about the manager, not trusting them when they should? Because sometimes people, maybe you shouldn't trust them to do it without some oversight. And I guess a big thing there would be about building a ramp-up process with some built-in oversight. So once the manager is willing to delegate, they should be. It is part of their job. It's not really optional. Managers, directors, and above, our job and as business owners is to get results through our team, not to do everything ourselves. If we do it all ourselves, that's a failure in how things went. So with that in mind about, building up the team, the first time you assign something to someone, you shouldn't expect them to get it done without any further guidance, without any further check-ins. Here's a sample framework to use, and you can customize this out to, to your specifics. And for everyone's listening, this applies to you too. When you assign something for the first time, clarify what the ideal outcome looks like. When this is complete, we will have this, this, and this. Share the resources available to say, we have a subscription to this. Here's where to find the login info for that. That will have some additional info. And we also have some past assets in this folder, something like that, so that people know where to look, because they're not going to necessarily magically know that. You also want to clarify, what does the ideal outcome look like? And this is important. If you ever delegated something and the result that came back was totally different from what you expected, the magic is building in pre-scheduled check-ins. It's not micromanagement if you're doing a pre-scheduled check-in. So using a simple example, let's say you've assigned a task that you think will take someone a month. From your experience, it'll probably be faster, but you figure it's the first time they're doing it, it might take them a month. Do an initial meeting where you review what's going on and talk about the ideal outcomes and resources and so on, answer their initial questions. Then schedule a check-in a week later where you review their initial progress, see what their initial questions are, and you might discover that they might be off track. They may have misunderstood something. Now you can help them course correct when you've got 3 weeks left, rather than it's already due and it's too late. Depending on that goes, you may want to schedule another check-in a week after that, or maybe you wait until, 3 weeks into they're working on it. And then eventually you review the work at the end and you debrief on it. Now, that's going to depend on the person, right? Depending on their skill level, they may not need as many check-ins. Depending on their past performance, they may need not as many or they may need more. Although keep in mind that if someone needs too many check-ins, then maybe a sign that they're a wet twine employee rather than a new rope employee. But what's your reaction for us to that sort of phased approach of don't just dump it on someone, but you're going to have to be somewhat involved, at least the first time. What's your reaction to that approach?
Well, it's validating, and I would couple it with the recommendation that I kind of wrote down was a quarter, a half, or a third and a third, something like that. So I can explain that in simple terms, like
perfect. Yes.
For my senior folks to say, look, this person might be a quarter and a half, this person might be a third and a third, but think about it that way. And then when you said the whole like dump it on them conversation that I've been having is, it's hard to delegate by the job number. We all wish we could do that. Here's the job, there's the number, we'll see you on the other end. It's, when you're bringing people along, delegating by the job number just doesn't work. So that's kind of the way I process it.
I've asked my colleague Kat to share my article on delegation advice. Why is delegation so hard? It's like at least 15 steps. The first time you delegate something, because you're defining, is this something that needs to be delegated? What's the skill set I need? Who are the people I can delegate to? Finding, hiring, getting them under contract. Now, obviously, you don't have to do all of those steps every single time. You've got a team member, they're likely able to do it. You don't have to sign a new contract with them. But you also have to sort through, how do you communicate the task? How do you also plan ahead to integrate their work into your work? Thinking about my doing, group projects back in, as an undergrad business major, I was often the group leader, and I knew that part of my job would be to integrate all of the work from everyone else. It's not just expecting the day it's due that everything will magically come together, whether you're wearing a project manager hat or not. So someone has to put the pieces together, make sure it all fits, which may mean for you, Forrest, and for everyone listening, if you pre-schedule those check-ins the first time you do something, and maybe you do them, less frequently the second time someone does it, and maybe, not after that, it may make sense to do a check-in at like 90% of the work. If you've noticed that the person may be good at getting things pretty far along, but like not finishing up the last bits, getting the last bits done, maybe, sort of the construction metaphor is they're good at the kind of the rough carpentry, but not the finishing carpentry, the little last details. Do that check-in, especially if their due date is close to the client-facing due date, if it's a client-facing thing. A lot of people complain about the idea of the meeting before the meeting. And I think that's short-sighted. There is a lot of value to doing the meeting before the meeting, because if you're meeting with the client and you're sharing key results, key deliverables, things like that, maybe the results of the latest sprint, you want everyone on your team to be on the same page about what's going on. So that if a client asks a question, everyone knows, like, how are things going? Are there potential hot button issues that you should maybe defer to the account manager on that? Things like that. So although people complain about meeting before the meeting, it is a really good idea if there are going to be some, potentially tense or difficult topics. Forrest, does that help as you're sorting through what to do next with your team?
Yeah, I have some good notes. Thank you. I have
Awesome.
one question to throw out there that you can post or put in the parking lot. And that is, I have a lot of really nice people that are soft delegators because they take care of the people. Like, I don't want to overload so-and-so. And then I have lots of one-on-ones with people across the agency to check in.
Right.
I mean, ask someone, how busy are you? And they'll say, I could take on more. And it's like, go to their supervisor and say, they're not really that busy. They're really interesting. Of course, I could not be getting the truth as an authority figure, but what do you say?
And it's important that you're recognizing that when you ask a question or when you say something, it has, 10 times the weight of someone else saying it because you're the boss.
Yeah.
You could potentially fire them if they give the wrong answer. Now, ideally, your team feels safe giving, giving answers even if it's bad news, kind of thing. Um, this fits into some of the things you talked about, earlier in the Q&A about perception versus reality. I would start with looking at what someone's actual billables are relative to what their target is.
Mhm.
If maybe their target is to be 80% billable and they're only billing 30%, if they think they're overloaded, they're not, according to the numbers. Now, it's possible that they're doing a lot of non-billable work. Maybe something has blown up and they're getting sucked into that.
Mhm.
You'll want to do some further troubleshooting. It's not solely by the number, but
Right.
I would compare their target versus their actual. I would
Mhm.
also look at, total hours logged. If someone is working 80 hours a week, they're overloaded and you need to get stuff off their plate. Hopefully their direct manager has noticed that. The
Yeah.
flip side of that would be a client mentioned that, she noticed that an employee was working like 30 hours a week when he was supposed to be a full-time employee, at least 40. And it had been happening for months. And she was like, I'm so frustrated. And I'm like, I understand you're frustrated. How did that slip through the cracks? They'd lost a project manager. They hadn't rehired the project manager yet. And no one was paying attention to it.
Mhm.
So things happen. But does that help as you're sorting through how to navigate some of that?
Yes. Thank you. I have some
Uh,
good notes. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, Forrest, thank you for joining. Our final question today is from Christina. Christina, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, we'll go ahead and bring you on. Oh, you know what? Looks like she may have had to run early. It was a good question. Let me answer the question, and then we'll wrap up for this month. And if you didn't have a chance to get one of your questions in today, please, Kat is going to share the link in chat. Please sign up for a future event. Include your question if you want to ask a question. And if you don't want to ask a question, that's totally fine too. Just listen along. You don't even have to be on video and hear what's going on. Christina asked, what do you do when you have a client who is disorganized? They're really disorganized, but they also tend to micromanage us on strategy work. They've hired us to do strategy, but they seem to want to get really involved in it and not let us do our job. Not a fun situation. Here are a few points to consider. If a client is disorganized, why are they disorganized? In chat, Kat is sharing my article on dealing with content delays. If it's something where you ask them to share something, but they're not sharing it, well, why? They may want to share it. They may be struggling to keep up. In that case, what can you do to build out templates and build out extra reminders and things like that? As one of my mentors said years ago, if you want someone to do something for you, do it for them. That is, give them the template to fill out. When I work with new clients and I need a lineup of their team, including roles and compensation and morale assumptions and this and that, I have a template. I have my employee census template so that people don't have to create it from scratch. They can just fill it in, ask their operations lead to put in the info, and they don't have to create it from scratch. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. So dig into why. Sometimes keep in mind that if a client is disorganized, that may just be their culture, maybe their personality or how they work, maybe their culture. Years ago, I was an agency PM and I inherited a client. I'd heard they were very slow to respond. And I decided, well, you know what? I'm the new person on the account. Let me try to reboot things. It was a PM title, but I was wearing an account manager hat as well. So I set up a call with the client that I'd heard was difficult. And I asked her to, kind of get to know each other, to learn more about her work. And it turned that she was doing a lot of different things. And I noticed the work we were doing for her didn't show up on her, description. And I said, thinking about the such and such we're doing, where does that fall on your list of priorities? She laughed and she said, it's like number 9 on my list. Oh, well, suddenly it all made sense. She wasn't slow to respond and kind of disorganized because she didn't like us. It just wasn't important for her priorities. And we were able to do a reset to give her what she needed when she needed it. And everyone was a lot happier. So understand why they're disorganized and look for ways to help them out. Now, there's that second question. What do you do when a client has hired you to do strategy work, but they don't seem to want to let you actually do the strategy work? They're trying to, direct things around. That's a tough situation because although, agencies are hopefully hired to do strategy work, shared the article in chat about repositioning as a strategy first agency, ultimately clients are responsible for the strategy work. They're overseeing it and they're responsible to their boss for having a good strategy. Plus, most clients don't really want to admit to their boss that the agency did the strategy, that they, as the CMO or the VP of marketing or the director of marketing, didn't come up with the strategy themselves. That's sort of an inherent built-in problem. So, keep in mind that sometimes your job is to be behind the scenes doing the strategy work, and then the client presents it as their own. You may not get credit for it, but as long as you're getting paid for it and you understand that's how the relationship is going to work, and your direct client knows the value, you're probably going to be fine. Although you do want to work your way up in the organization to help cement the relationship. So that can be something to keep in mind as you're sorting through that. Make the client the hero. It's their strategy now. And also they're going to have to own it, right? You might have some recommendations that make sense to you, but it may not make sense given the client's company culture, the client's internal goals, maybe their personal goals, that kind of thing. So part of it is accepting that, the client ultimately is the owner of the strategy. But I also try to take a look at, why are they interfering? Why are they trying to mess things up? Maybe it's the only thing they have control over in their work. Maybe, I've had some cases where a client's personal life was out of control and, bossing around the agency was one of the only things they could do, and they did. And, although that wasn't fun as the person working with them at the agency, it made it less personal, right? They weren't micromanaging because they didn't like me or the agency. It's because the rest of their life was out of control. So those are some things to think about. If you've got clients who tend to be disorganized, dig into why, try to understand why they're disorganized, and then find ways to help them out, ideally in a billable way. And if you've got a client who keeps interfering with your work, especially if it's more strategic work, try to understand where they're coming from. And you can use my reason options choose framework, a negotiation framework. You give them a reason, you give them 2 or 3 options, you let them choose. That can help you redirect things in a more positive way. That concludes the April 2021 Agency Office Hours. Please go ahead and click subscribe on YouTube if you're watching the recording, and I look forward to seeing you again at a future